Hey guys, my name is Graham Johnson, and I run a hobby channel here on YouTube, and I am a colorblind artist, but that is not what this video is about. Today I'm joined by CJ from Trash Dragon Hobbies, and we're going to be talking about 3D printing and how that has affected the hobby community. Or more or less, I do quite a bit of talking, and CJ just kind of listens and gives his 2 cents at the end. I tend to ramble on sometimes, as you guys know from my content. Hopefully you guys find this interesting and maybe see some insight into someone who's owned a game store and how 3D printing kind of affects everything on the end of a mom and pop game store. And hopefully you guys find this interesting.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how you doing?
Pretty good.
I used to own a game store, so I have some
Really?
insight to that, and it'd be interesting to see how you respond to some of the things that we experienced as a game store.
What did you experience?
So one of the big things that we really experienced is like overnight, in like 4 or 5 days, about half of our Warhammer community just canceled all their orders that they had with us. And
wow.
yeah, like within like a week and a half or 2 weeks, all of a sudden all these players who had models with us that were ordered had models. You know, they weren't gray plastic, they were, you know, electric clear green. So I knew they had been 3D printed. So
they were bringing them in.
Yeah, basically they were having these guys 3D print their armies for them instead of ordering models. I know at one point GW actually had to press a lawsuit against an artist who was basically looking at brand new models that weren't even out yet and was recreating 3D printable files of brand new models and then just floating them out there for free. So like people who were putting in pre-orders were coming back in like the next day and canceling pre-orders because they'd found this 3D printer file. They had to put in a rule that stated like regardless of what game you play was to put this hard hold on how much of your army can be 3D printed. And there's a lot of people in 3D printing community whose responses are, well, you should have a better product, or you should carry better products, or you should carry products that people actually want. Well, you know, it's one thing, you know, for someone to be like, oh, that Forge World model is $250. Screw Forge World, I'm just gonna 3D print it for $1.98 or whatever, you know?
Exactly.
But when you look at the mom and pop store and you're like, oh, I just pre-ordered a $40 box of models, but I'm gonna go get Dan or whoever it was, you know, I'm gonna go get Dan to 3D print me that box of models instead, and I'm gonna cancel my pre-order. That was the problem that we were having with people in the community with 3D printers. And you know, it wasn't intentional by the people who had the 3D printer, but the fact that they weren't saying no. And I know one of the guys who ended up buying a 3D printer toward the end before we closed from COVID, he actually wasn't even charging people for 3D prints. He was just taking orders and then basically charging the cost of the resin. So like
super cheap.
Yeah, we basically had to put a hard rule in. And right around the same time that happened, the big Las Vegas Open for Warhammer had just happened, and the person who won had an entirely 3D printed Forge World army.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like they had done no effort to try to hide the fact that it was 3D printed. It had all been 3D printed on a filament printer, so it was very obvious it had been printed. Yeah.
I would be embarrassed to field an army that was on a filament printer, honestly.
Yeah.
It doesn't do that great.
What was worse is like if you look at the pictures of it, because I think it was like a Sisters of Battle army or something like that. So it was like super ornate models done with a filament printer. And this guy had come in like second or third place the year before, if I remember correctly. I might be mistaken, and the tournament standard is 3 colors. So like his tank literally looked like a Neapolitan, where he had just spray painted 3 different colors on it.
Yep.
And
that happens.
It does happen, but like I said, like he won that tournament, which so it kind of opened up a lot of local game stores to have to like be like, okay, are we going to allow this or are we not going to allow this? And Games Workshop even sent out a newsletter specifically geared toward 3D printing, and we were basically told by Games Workshop not to gatekeep 3D printing.
And when you say gatekeep, what do you mean?
So we were told by Games Workshop, if a player, especially if it's a player we've never had in the store before, were to walk in with a mostly 3D printed army, we were told we couldn't turn them away from playing at our tables.
And what was the consequence
if they found out that we were gatekeeping 3D printing? There was a chance that they could suspend us from being able to buy product for a few weeks. And if we continued to gatekeep 3D printing, we were told that there was a very good chance that we may actually have to completely do away with our affiliate, basically meaning that they would stop selling to us altogether, and the only way we'd be able to buy product was through other stores.
Interesting. Now, did they give you any reasoning behind that? Like, did they...
Their reasoning behind it was again, they're trying to be a very open, family-friendly environment with their local stores, and they want people to feel welcome in the community and in the hobby, so they don't want gatekeeping of any kind. But the issue with this was, and I knew someone who owned an actual Games Workshop store, or I say they owned it, they were a manager of it, up in the Panhandle, and he told me that the newsletter that they received said that you were not to allow any 3D printed models in the building at all. So at the time, Games Workshop was not allowing mom and pop stores to say no to 3D printing, but they wanted their own stores to say no to 3D printing.
Right, so they understood what it was doing.
Yeah, they were 100% aware of what it was doing.
It sounds like you have some strong opinions about 3D printing.
I have mixed strong opinions about 3D printing because I own one now, you know?
Right, I saw that you have an Anycubic, right?
Right, and so, and this is real on topic, right? So, Forge World at one point, my understanding, had a Lionel Johnson, leader of Dark Angel, Primarch model. I don't know if they still make it or like if there's a few left in stock. But from my understanding from the research I did, he was pretty expensive when he came out, and a lot of people were not happy with the price tag. I have found a fan-made version of Lionel Johnson, and then I have somebody who is claiming to have recreated the Forge World one. And so I've scaled them up to be the same size as Gilliman, so I have a Gilliman model in my backlog. And so they're now the right size for current Primarch models, so I could use them as a stand-in in games and just use, Gilliman's rule set, but call him Lionel Johnson. But like that comes into the topic, like I personally, and you may have a difference of opinion on this, but it sounds like from what I understand you don't. Personally, I don't have an issue with someone who 3D prints something that is no longer available. Gale Force 9 makes an iTyrant model, and when I was the owner of my game store, I reached out to Gale Force 9 asking them about all these super old models that they had, and they still had a bunch of them like just sitting in a closet that nobody seemed to know that they had. So I just ordered up a bunch of them and sold them at their original cost instead of cranking the price up. Their iTyrant model just doesn't exist anymore. They didn't have any anymore. I found a 3D printer model where someone came pretty close to matching the original sculpt. I have no issue with printing something like that because the existing ones that are still out there are going for like $120. And wow. I think the original retail value was $45.
Right, you can almost get like a entry-level printer for that.
Right, exactly. And then just make your own, right? So
right.
I don't have an issue with that. I think, there's a certain thing to be said about supply and demand, but when the supply becomes so low and the demand becomes so high that it's cheaper to buy a 3D printer and then make your own, I don't have a problem with it at that point.
Not at all. What's the line for you? Because it sounds like you've thought about this a lot and you have that you think are okay to print and some things then are not.
And this is a personal thing for me because I have to do a fair amount of research on my own personally before I decide if I'm okay with this. And I think That's something that the average person doesn't do, and I think the reason I do it is because I've been on both sides of the line. We'll use this as an example. I love the Mastodon model from Forge World. I don't know why I love it so much, but every time I've ever seen one in person, I just love the paint job on it. No matter how simple or how crazy the paint job is, I just love it. I want one for my army, even though I can't use it anymore because they did away with the rules for it. Here, let me pull up Forge World real quick, and let's see what the current price is for a Mastodon.
Is it like $500?
It's a lot. I think if it's not 500, it's close to 500.
Because the other one I really liked was the boat on wheels. Do you remember that one? It was like for the Empire.
I think so.
Fantasy, and that thing's like $600 from Forge World. You know, on eBay it's like 1,000, which is insane.
Well, and you know, I have a Night Hunt army that I'm in the middle of painting, and I have a Forge World model, and I forget what its exact name is. But I looked it up one time, and that Forge World model is like $90. I have found better looking 3D printable models of that exact same model where I've pulled it up in my software just to see how expensive it would be to print it. And it's like $8 or $9 to print it, even if you print it solid.
Yeah.
So I have not been able to find that 3D printer file in all the time that I have been looking for it, but I have to imagine it's cheaper than $500 to print one. And I do understand the logistics of, like, you know, making a model. Like, you've got to pay the sculptor, even if it's a digital sculptor. You've got to pay the art department to then paint it for the pictures on the website. But $500 for a single model, even the fact that it's like a 1 foot long model, I don't think that's okay.
Yeah, it's very expensive. So I just looked this up. One of the Patreons that I support has a War Mammoth as their, if you've been with them for 6 months,
Wow.
you get it for free. I don't know how big it is. It's not quite as nice as like the GW one in my opinion, which is odd because they're really great. But it's close enough.
What's weird about the way that GW goes in and decides like what they're okay with, because you know GW has like, I don't want to call them like a flock of lawyers because it's not lawyers, but they've got like a group of people that go in on the internet and look for stuff like this to have it removed, you know? So like if there's stuff that they're not okay with being out there, they'll throw out threats of class action lawsuits and stuff and get you to take it down. GW doesn't seem to have a problem with people posting games that they don't really support to Thingiverse. So like Titanicus, they don't really have a problem with people posting Titanicus stuff because even though it's a game that they still have as a purchasable thing, they're not really supporting it. I think the last time a model came out for Titanicus was over a year ago. Right. But the Warlord Titan exists as a Titanicus model, and the same guy who got threatened with a lawsuit and was forced to take down the original Warlord model just reposted it as a Titanicus model. And in his description, he says, if you actually want to print this for Titanicus, you need to scale it down by like 6,000%. But it's all the original files at the original size for normal, 42 millimeter or 32 millimeter that model is supposed to be. So, yeah, it's still the original files at the original scaling, and it's been up for like 3 or 4 years now, and the original got taken down. But they don't seem to be poking around on the Titanicus side of things because they don't support it anymore.
Huh. And that's something that is kind of interesting about 3D printing is like it pushes the lines of whatever these copyright laws are, and it also puts the power of production into the hands of consumers.
Right.
Which changes the game. It kind of flips the script on like what you can do and what you're willing to pay for and not willing to pay for.
I've noticed, and 3D printing, from what I'm seeing, and you're the one who sees the numbers, so I don't have the numbers to look at. But for you, 3D printing seems to be doing really well on your platform.
Yeah. I was talking to... So one of my best friends is like executive level social media manager for a global Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to her about my channel, and like I had one video that went like absolutely bonkers, 750,000. And that was just me reading someone else's tweet. It has nothing to do with 3D printing. I made fun of Texas. I live in Texas. And like people were like cussing me out and finding me all across like different platforms to threaten me and cuss me out. And I was like, you idiots. I'm living through this. Like I am living through the ice storm.
Yeah, I'm a part of this too, idiot. Like I'm making I'm making lightheart of my own situation. Yeah.
So that went nuts. But regarding views, yeah, the 3D printed things, like across the board, it's up and down. Like
yeah,
I'm pretty sure there's intermittent reinforcement going on with TikTok, where like you do well for a week, you do poorly for a week, unless I just make bad content every other week, which is also very light. So your original question was, what's the comparison of my 3D printed videos versus my like normal videos?
Yeah.
Average, a 3D print video will do 5 to 30 times better than just like a build video, except for one build video when I made a crate, and that has like 70,000 views, and I remember
that. I remember that video.
I don't get it. I was like, I made a box. It was easy.
The fact that I am just uploading like, hey, this is how I paint a leather cape. Hey, this is how I do red hair. And I've got almost 300 people following me just for that. Like, yeah, I'm super excited about that. I know I don't sound excited, but I am I am just blown away by the fact that there are 300 people that saw a generic YouTube tutorial with low budget values and were like, yes, this is the content I'm here for. Right.
Is there anything else you wanted to cover today? I need to get going here soon.
Yeah, we'll just wrap it up with, so we kind of talked about my thoughts and my opinions about 3D printing and the hobby world, but I'd like to hear just straight your take on, specifically, do you think 3D printers are bad for, you know, the miniature market as a whole, or do you think that, you know, as consumers, we're smart enough to realize that we should be supporting local stores?
I don't know. I don't know that I have a... I'll tell you why I bought a 3D printer. I bought a 3D printer so that I don't have to give Games Workshop any more money.
And a lot of people who I've met who have 3D printers have said the exact same thing.
Like, that's why. When I buy paint, when I buy anything else, I try to go to like a local game store if I can.
Yeah.
But when it comes to models, like, I would rather give my money to someone who's designing beautiful models that I can just buy on Patreon. It comes pre-supported. As far as like the miniature market as a whole, dude, I have no clue what goes into that. Like,
yeah.
If I speak to that, I'm just gonna sound like an idiot because I'm not an economist. I don't have an MBA, and like I am 100% a consumer of things that I like and not things that I don't like.
Well, and I feel like that's the smart approach to take it, because like we were talking earlier on when we first started talking. You know, we have to decide as a consumer what is okay to print versus what should we be buying. And I think the thought process that you bring up here is, if I can support a LGS, a local game store, I should be supporting a local game store. Me as a local game store owner, I appreciate that, but my community didn't seem to understand that. And one of the issues we started to run into toward the end, when everybody was 3D printing things instead of buying things from us, we toyed around with the thought of having membership days where this is a guaranteed day when the table will be available. It's not a first come first serve. Your membership essentially is, guaranteeing you a spot at our table. And people rejected it violently, saying that, as a game store, you should be providing a free space and that I shouldn't have to pay to play here. But yet, they weren't buying their paints there. They'd rather buy paints in bulk on Amazon, and they would rather 3D print than to buy the model from us. And so at that point, when do you stop being a consumer, right? They're trying to claim that they're a customer, but yet they're not buying anything from us except for like a 50-cent soda every time they show up.
Right.
So
yeah, they want like a hobby club.
Right, they want a hobby club, but they don't want to pay for it.
Right.
I agree with you. I feel like if you can buy local, you should be buying local. And that if you can't buy local, or the cost of the model is just so insanely expensive that it's ridiculous, then I think it kind of justifies itself.
Two thoughts that come to my mind are, unfortunately, what does that mean for the long-term viability of even a Games Workshop? And I think what will go first is the, unfortunately, small stores, unless there's a way to adapt. One thought I had was can you put a 3D printer in a store? Yeah,
so one of the things that we almost did, and then COVID kind of put an end to that, we were looking at buying 6 or 8 3D printers from different makes and models, and I think 3 were going to be filament printers, with the explicit intent of you will pay to take a class on how to use these, and then you can come in and print as much as you want and just pay the cost of the material and an extra couple bucks for electricity, and we will just provide these for you. And then, if you get a clog or a jam or something massively fails, the store will take care of it. You don't have to learn to take care of it. That's what we were going to do, and then we decided that it just wasn't quite worth it. And I think what's going to happen with my store is we are going to convert, because we're basically closed at this point. We had a lot of really unfortunate things kind of hit us all at once right before COVID started, and we just said, well, this is us not having to shoot the horse after the race. We're done. We're going to pull the plug now. I will convert the store into an online store that is basically both a traditional hobby store, because I can just store all this stuff in my garage and nobody has to come see it, and a 3D printing company, meaning I will print files for people who cannot afford a 3D printer.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I think that's what my store is going to turn into.
I appreciate the conversation. It's been super fun.
Yeah.
My wife gets sick of me talking about my hobby stuff. She's like, go away. She's super introverted. She's like, go talk to someone else about it. But I'm CJ. I have a YouTube channel and I'm on TikTok. It's at Trash Dragon Hobbies. Appreciate you reaching out and having a conversation on a Saturday night about hobby stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if anybody out there who's watching found this even remotely interesting, I'm sure you wouldn't mind doing this again sometime.
Absolutely. That sounds great to me.
Yeah.
I love it.
Thanks so much.
Beautiful models, though.
Yeah. One of the Night Hunt models that I have, when I got it, because I got them in a trade, he's holding a mace with 2 hands, and it's snapped off at the wrists. And I measured the width of the wrists, and they're less than 1 millimeter.
Oh my gosh.
And so all I can imagine is if this thing was sitting on a Citadel painting handle and you bumped it and it tipped over, like there's a 50-50 chance it's just gonna snap, like if you had a brand new one, right? And so with a lot of my models, what I've done is I've gone in and I've sculpted shackles on their wrists, because a lot of them are covered in chains and other types of stuff like that. And so what that does is that green stuff little donut around their wrist is just reinforcing that wrist to stop it from snapping.
It needs it. The models are cool. The Night Hunt models are really cool.
Yeah. But it's a really great way to reinforce those models and just hide breaks and things like that. Like I put a TikTok video out where I did that, and I think like half the comments in that video were like, and get this, buy another one. And it's like, what do you not understand about what we're doing here? Like half the comments were like, you could just buy another one, and the other half were like, just use a dot of super glue. And it's like, yes, we did use super glue. This is called reinforcement. And then like occasionally I had someone who was like, why aren't you pinning the model? And it's like, do you not understand how small these things are? Like, I understand that I'm 6'2" and I have very large hands, but the fact that my hand is 5 times the size of the model should give you a good indication as to why I'm not using a metal pin.
Exactly. Because, like, normally in heroic scale, you just, drill in there, you put a rod in of whatever, like a paper clip, glue it, and you're good to go. But when it's that small, you literally can't drill.
Yeah.
It's not possible.